Thank you, and thank you very much for the invitation, the opportunity to do this research and to present our research on inequality here. So actually I'm the stand-in for Charlotte Bartels. She would probably do a much better job than me, but she told me my job was to wrap up in 10 minutes what's going on with inequality in Germany. So first of all, if we think about inequality, we have to think about what are we really looking at. As an inequality researcher, you can find any finding you want, just define your measure, your unit, your of interest, and your focal variable, and I can show you rising and falling trends in inequality all over. So what are we going to do is, and what are I going to do for this Forum of New Economy, is that we want to try to establish a view of Germany that's uncontested across everyone, hopefully. So this and what you see behind me is actually then what we're doing. Why is Germany interesting? So if we are looking at inequality in Germany, first of all, you have to think about inequality in a macro dynamic version. So what we are looking at in Germany is that we have a long tradition of looking at inequality of income, of earnings, but less income and earnings together. But if you're looking at Germany from 1950 to the 2015, you see that we have trends of inequalities that originate only about in the 80s. So if we're looking at national income and the division of national income between labor income and capital income, we see that in the 80s something is happening. In the 80s, we find that the labor income is growing less and the capital income is growing much more. And we find that this dispersion is actually one driver of inequality in Germany. If we are looking at the long-run trends, for instance, the famous work by Charlotte Bartels, she is looking at the income concentration across income groups. I want to show you, or want to look at the top 10 and the bottom 50. The top 10 is our economic elite, and the bottom 50 is the rest. So what we are seeing is, if we are going back to the 1960s, they're totally well off. 30% of the total income in Germany is concentrated in the bottom, 30% is concentrated in the top. If we go along, up till now, we find that we have inequality increase. Nowadays, it's 40% of income concentrated in the top and only 16% concentrated in the bottom. So we started as a rather equal society after Second World War, and now income concentration has become an issue in the top. If we're looking at wealth inequality, again, we find that Germany is one of the most unequal countries regarding this kind of measure. Wealth inequality in Germany is about 0.8 if you take the Gini coefficient in the year 2012. And even if we control for wealth that's not really real wealth, like pension wealth, accumulated pension benefits that probably substitute savings, we still find that we have an inequality of about 0.6 measured by the Gini. So we have a rather unequal society wealth-wise. If we now think back that inequality or the capital share of income is increasing, we have concentration in the top, and we have this unequal wealth and wealth distribution. Obviously, it's very easy to think about where this income is going to come to benefit in society. It's the top, and that's what we are looking if we look at growth incidence curves. What you see here is a red line. The red line is zero growth. Then we have a dashed line. The dashed line is growth on average over a 10-year period of income. And then we have the solid line. The solid line is a growth incidence. And using these two horizontal lines, we can actually divide this graph into three portions. The first one is the portion where we have the lowest third of the population, where we have growth that is below 0 or 0. Then we have the second part. The second part is growth between 0 and average growth. So this part of the society probably profited from the economic development over the decade showed here, 2000 to 2012. And then we have the last part. The last part is the income growth that goes to the top third. And there we have above average growth. And then if you go at the top decile, we have way above average growth. So, and this is where the wealth is concentrated. This is where our capital income goes. So, so this is where we are. If we are leaving capital income behind, we come to the wage distributions, wage and earnings. It's the most important part of German income. And if we are looking, for instance, as the research from Dustmann et al., we are looking at the West German wage distribution. We find that before unification, we have a process of dispersion. We have that the lower part of the distribution is not really losing, but the upper part of the distribution, the 85th percentile, so it's the upper line, is increasing its wages. Looking further on, we have the development after unification, and here the picture is quite different. Now the top is still increasing and is still getting more and more of the earnings, but wages in the bottom of the distribution are actually declining. So we have a real wage decrease at the bottom of the distribution, at least this research until 2004. So we have not only, so we have a dispersion on the labor market. Further, if we accumulate these dispersions over the labor market, accumulated, and then we have lifetime earnings. So how does this disadvantage of the bottom accumulate over the lifetimes? And this is what we look at lifetime earnings. And we have here again the top and the bottom. The bottom is the red arrows. The top is the black arrows or whatever. And we see that while the top is still increasing, has overall growth above birth cohorts 1935 until 1975 of about 1.7, the bottom of the distribution actually is losing in terms of lifetime earnings, and the earnings of the cohort 1975 are almost as bad as they started off in 1945. So they have a decrease at the bottom of the distribution. And if we are looking at the overall inequality of this development, we find that if we are looking at lifetime earnings of the cohort depicted here from 1935 to 1975, we find an increase of above almost 100%. So this is much more and a much steeper increase than we find if we are looking at annual or cross-sectional earnings. What's is the next generation better off? This is another question we are trying to tackle, and so where we follow the research by Chetty. So actually what we're looking is at if our parents had an economic position and they want to give these economic advantages to their children and hope that they are better off, how many actually, which share accomplishes to be better off than their parents were. So what we find in the US, we have this famous Fading American Dream story by Chetty, that we actually have a decline. In Germany, we find the same, not as prominent, but we are mirroring the American development a few years later. So we started in the 1950s or late 1950s birth cohorts of children, and if we were born there as a child, the chances were that we are better off than our parents were 90%. So it's pretty nice. But if we're looking now at the birth cohorts 1985 and later, these chances diminish to about 70%. It's still decreasing. But income is not everything, so we have to look at expenditures as well. So if we want to look at the utility or the economic well-being, it's not only important what they have to spend, but are they free to spend it where they want it. And there we can look, for instance, at survey data for housing. And if we look at survey data for housing, we see in the first part of this graph that the expenditure share for housing in the lowest quartile is going up steeply by about 30%, while the housing expenditures in the upper part, in the highest quintile, is decreasing by almost 10%. And connecting this to our change in income, I showed you before that we have an increase at the top and a decrease at the bottom. The share of housing expenditures in Germany is almost high at the lowest part of the distribution, about 40%. So this is where we're heading if we are looking at expenditures, and there's more to come. So what is the research agenda with these forums? So what actually is going to happen is that there will be a lot more work on rent income, a lot more work on expenditures, and a lot more work on the long run trends and try to explain this. So thank you very much, and I hope I enlightened you a little bit about inequality.